Good day, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from Hawaii, October 28th, 2021. Sorry for the late start. I was on the phone with a doctor in Cleveland, and now I'm here. Today is part 10 in this 11-part series. Tomorrow will be my final day for a while. I hope to resume these podcasts and live streams as I see it. Early in November. They're broadcast here on Facebook. We put them on YouTube. They're on SoundCloud. They're on Lisbon, Apple, Google, and a variety of other podcast channels worldwide. Thank you for tuning in. Today's talk sharing is psychedelics. Psychedelics and creativity. And I'm going to just dive in wherever you may be. I hope you have an open mind, an open heart, and we together explore this very contemporary, powerful, at times provocative interface between psychedelics, organic, chemical, oxygenated, psychedelic as metaphor, analogy as well. And the process of creativity, creative thinking. I want to start right off by, so much for me of creativity is rooted in mindful intelligence, in the merger of these two dimensions of interiority. And mindfulness is the awareness of mind coupled with discernment and inquiry and questioning and intelligent doubt and deep reasoning and intuitive analytical assessment of the texture, the characteristic, the manifestation of the phenomena that's present in the moment. Mindful intelligence discerns the phenomenology in the moment and understands on a deeply reflective, repetitively reflective level, the value of something that's arising, the value of the thought, the value of speech, the value of behavior. Is it tend towards edification and the overcoming of fear and anger and delusion? Does it promote love, compassion, and wisdom? That's what I mean about the skillfulness of mindful intelligence present with the phenomenology of sense objects. And then we have the issue of creativity and creative thinking. And I want to dive into that again in context to the psychedelic. And I cannot exclude the dimension of meditation from the psychedelic. And creativity here is this CQ, this creative intelligence coupled with mindful intelligence, is what I would call, and what I've been calling for some time, Dharma artistry. The unique style, the novelty of the individual's capacity to interface with life through the senses in a way that's respectful of your originality, your novelty, the absence of shame to perform, to abide, to live in configuration with illusions often assumed rather than real. Very much like the illusion of apartheid that Rosa Parks challenged by refusing to sit at the back of the bus. The illusion of apartheid, the illusion of discrimination. And so creativity is this love of one's own uniqueness as a God molecule in the ocean of totality, and the multiplicity of this existential dance of individuality with a groundlessness, with eternal impermanence, and without centrality. And is it oneness? Is it transparency? That edge. So welcome aboard today. So much to share, and thank you for tuning in. You know, some of the main points about psychedelics. And I want to emphasize that psychedelics in and of themselves, I feel, are not what they are claiming to be. And having done them for 55 years, having low dosed back in the 80s, high dosed in the 60s, continuing to low and moderate dose here in the 2020, 2021, even in the last few months, even in the last few days, even this morning. And it's really what you bring to it. It's like you can meditate until the cows come home, and unless you really bring something unique called your passion, your urgency, your innate resolve to look at phenomena courageously and listen carefully to the guide. And even so, you can be riddled with denial, self-deception, and the insult of ignorance shrouding even your own dynamic practice. I mean, high dosing meditation is no guarantee of insight, wisdom, or enlightenment, or even realization at any level. You can fortify your own denial, fortify your own self-deception, and fortify your own ignorance, even through intensive meditation. I've seen it for decades, and the same is true with the use of psychedelic. It is no guarantee at all that something remarkable is going to happen that furthers right view, realistic assessment of phenomena, the overcoming of fear, greed, and delusion. The touchstones, to me, of sanity. And the vocation of the yogi, the psychonaut, the meditator, to evolve the good, the true, and the beautiful. Now, I want to also stress the obvious, but not often so obvious to some people, that I am obviously just an individual, and I've never advocated the use of psychedelics, and I don't advocate them. I don't even advocate meditation. It's so intensive. I don't advocate psychotherapy. I wouldn't advocate that woman or that man as your lover. It's all personal. It's all so sensitive. And so the use of psychedelics for me have been very compelling over the last five and a half decades, more specifically the last 20 years, and even more so in the last couple of years, and even more so the last year, and even more so the last few months. But in various amounts and configurations that, well, like meditation, the psychedelic is a mind manifesting organic, pharmaceutical, earth-based God molecule that, if engaged, I want to use the word carefully here, rightly, but engaged with creative intelligence that's merged with mindful intelligence, it has the capacity to lift a mind that's manifesting into realization, luminosity, insight, and wisdom. And that's a big distinction between manifesting consciousness and wisdom about the manifestation of consciousness. Some of the touch points of using psychedelics skillfully for me, and the emergence of a creative aptitude to personally enhance the value of your own soul, advance yourself as your own agent of transformation, is the beauty of self-reliance, setting and set and guides and psychotherapists and psychonauts and Dharma teachers and meditation guides all have their place. But ultimately, meditation is you on you. It's the joyful soul rapture at times to bravely engage the flow of consciousness on the terms of what releases greed, anger, and delusion, shame, worry, doubt, the hindrances, and what elevates these timeless textures of beauty And so it requires having a visionary spirit to explore psychedelics and meditation for the quest to illuminate, if you will, creative thought and creativity. So an immediacy, a sacredness to the setting, a safety. I can't encourage enough to create a condition, if you explore with the psychedelic, to create a condition that is so optimal to an intimate sense of secure trust, just like a meditation center, an intimate, secure sense of trust that you are in optimal conditions to research the evidence of one's own heart, mind, and soul, to allow the challenge of subconscious phenomena, subconscious memories, subconscious, semi-conscious impressions, more immediate impressions that are configuring with semi-repressed configurations, and deeper substratum, subconscious phenomenology, that when you relax, hold, when I use the word immediacy, relaxing the attachment to an outcome, setting an intention of come what may, I wish to learn from you, I wish to embrace you, I wish to understand the nature of what's arising. That level of open-heartedness, again, I'm stating something so pure and so obvious, but I cannot reiterate it enough. If you're going to use the psychedelic for the organic catalyzing of the richness of possibility, that adventure of the soul, that adventure of the heart, that challenge to the centrality and the gravity of ordinary, predictability, a beautiful vocation, but we must be prepared to do what is required, I feel, to optimize the value of that special moment when you do choose to use a psychedelic in the company of a remarkable woman primarily, who's talented and skilled to hold space, or if it's a smaller dose, to do it on your own if you feel comfortable with that. But what will you do with the sacredness of that time? That's today's talk. So an immediacy, a coupling of creative intelligence with mindful intelligence. I wish I could get into it more, but I would really encourage you to listen to some of my older talks that are on my website about what are the components of mindful intelligence. There are so many people, no insult intended, that have dedicated their lives to substance use. And personally, I don't particularly hear that much wisdom coming through. And so mindful intelligence cannot be emphasized enough to keep a kind of astronautic discernment, if you will, to really, really reel in the need to have an experience that you've heard that's culturally acceptable. Oneness is so cliched today that you think that you're going to do a moderate or a high dose of DMT or MEO or something like that, and all of a sudden you think you're going to have this outrageous experience of merging ego death, oneness, oneness, oneness. There's some wisdom and value in that type of exploration, but immediacy with open-heartedness, without that cultural, spiritually acceptable, projected need for an outcome that lives in the obedience of your spiritual circle's desired reference points of identity. If you live in a Hindu-esque psychedelicized circle, oneness is everything. If you live in a Buddhist psychedelicized circumstance, emptiness of self is everything. However, I would recommend the relaxation of those deeper impressions, those kind of psychic, deeply embedded psychic belief systems, and hold back to state with intention the radical, intimate trust in the openness of heart, mind, body, and soul. And that level of purity optimizes, I feel, creative awakening. So immediacy, keeping a visionary spirit, that's not an easy thing to embody, but I'll talk more about it. For me personally, the psychedelic allows me to play within the experience of the psychic, intuitive, concentric opening of deeper dimensions of consciousness, the inherent intelligences I feel that are orchestrating probably everything that we think, say, and do. And that, to me, is a very beautiful pastime to be on my own in the psychedelic environment and to couple it with intimate meditative presence. Meditative presence is like, in Buddhist psychology, we talk about initial thought and sustained thought. Thought takes you to the experience to turn on the light of awareness. The desire to turn on your lights driving at night. The thought takes you to the lever. Awareness, the light itself must go on. The thought isn't sufficient. Creative thinking isn't sufficient to the experience of lighting the torch, the light, the candle, the sun, the transparent luminosity of awareness. That awareness is infused with mindful intelligence. All pre-thinking expressions of inherent regard for independent thinking/feeling, an awareness infused with the empiricist. And I think that's the most beautiful experience that we can hope for as psychonauts coupling our psychedelic experimentation. And I don't take anything away from the recreational types who just simply want a 5 to 10 to 20% more radiant sense of being to do what they do more skillfully. Namaste. But for me personally, it's that deeper tapestry of intersecting intelligences that I want to access more and more of these innate intelligences. Why? For me personally, just a digression more to the end of the talk, coming back to the beginning of the talk, and it's again an extemporaneous sharing. I am a great fan of the quantum physicist and astrophysicist and philosopher Michio Kaku. I've read his books numerous times. A Future for Humanity, one of my favorite books of his. And what's beautiful about it is his artfulness, his creative intelligence mixed with mindful intelligence to keep the existential artistry, the spiritual empiricist active. He doesn't seem to be looking for the need to confirm already existing frameworks of understanding, although he has a terribly coherent, vast knowledge of physics and quantum physics and dimensionality and the psychic intuitive, and a deep empathy, a deep compassion, other attributes of the psychedelic in creative thought, empathy and compassion, adventure, exploration. In the gentleman in his work, very much like the concept of bodhisattva in Buddhism. And I think ultimately the word psychonaut is imbued with the vocation of wanting to find greater safety, security, and sacred outcomes of environments where human life, animal life, deva life, deity life, Brahma life, all beings life that are bodied, embodied, and transembodied live in a more sacred, suffering-free context. I bring up that little riff because the motivation for me to keep an open-hearted empiricism as I dose and meditate and explore is I'm looking to fulfill my ambitions on why I entered a monastery to meditate, is to overcome suffering, to overcome self-generated suffering, and in that process to eliminate as much as humanly possible my inability to understand how I contribute unknowingly to the pain and the conflict and the suffering of the environment, to animals, and to other human life, and to Deva life. I want to do all I can on a spiritual, psychological, emotional, and existential level to minimize, if not radically eliminate, my collusion with ignorance. And therefore that collusion gives me this strange, perverse delight at times to unknowingly and knowingly denigrate, violate, and obscure how many people I've met as soldiers, mercenaries, leaders, who in their strange, perverse way delight in bombing other countries, killing other people, the enemy. And it's really a lack of imagination to see that behind the veil of enemy is a human mind, is a mind of consciousness, is a disembodied consciousness, moving through the currents of existential struggles. That mind has embedded fear in it, embedded ignorance in it. And so the psychonaut in the creative thinking process, like Michio Kaku here, is how to learn more skillfully ways to relax in the primordial fold of totality these inherent currents of fear, greed, anger, delusion, shame, grasping, attachment, domination, violation, excusing, judging, blaming, all the ways in which consciousness denigrates its own environment. And so, coming back to this list of immediacy and visionary spirit, the exploration of the psychic intuitive, it's the challenge to self-generated suffering and the expression of the opposite of suffering, which is your personal choice of how to champion your own personal meaning of the sacred. Tolerance, to me, is an attribute of the sacred. Reasoning is an attribute of the sacred. Unity and harmony are attributes of the sacred. Patience is an attribute of sacredness. Kindness is an attribute of sacredness. The role of tenderness is not only an attribute of sacredness, it's a key component for me in the exploration of the psychedelic, not just towards other, although I love that expression gifted to me, walking down the beach or somewhere other, or having a text or a call or someone reach out to me and there's an expression of tenderness. What a gift that is, and to be able to create a safe environment when you do explore the psychological with the psychedelic, with the meditative, I hope, to remember the importance that in creating a sacred environment, your sacred environment is primarily going to be interior, and the role of tenderness, that softening of the edges, no matter what comes up, no matter how phantasmagorical the hallucination is made real on the canvas or the cinema or the screen or the hologram of one's own consciousness. Tenderness. Inhabit it with tenderness, with softness, with warmth, with receptivity, with the heart of learning, which is really at the soul of tenderness. The heart, I want to know you. I want to soften my rejection of you. I want to open my soul to include you too. The role of the existential, non-violent activist in exploring totality. Michio Kaku speaks repeatedly of trying to understand, as many psychonauts do, many yogis do, many spiritual people do, how can we understand dimensionality and how can we inhabit safer places in this cosmos than planet Earth at the moment. Many of you know I've studied climate change. I've studied extinctions. You know, I don't say on a scholarly level, but I've done my own human research into those domains. And so part of my reach right now, very much like what I read about with Michio Kaku and other environmentalists and other psychonauts and quantum physicists and yogis, those mystical adventurers, they're really looking for places of inhabitation, if you will, where we can abide and flourish in a greater safety from the delusions that we brought forth unknowingly. Human beings, in this great anthropocentric expression of human-generated, I want to use the word methane releases in the Arctic and in the poles, permafrost, and the burning of fossil fuels and the engine of consumption that's leading to a rapid increase in heat being sustained, and this feedback loop of more consumption, heating things, and all of a sudden we threw a rock over the cliff that's going faster and faster. And the momentum of this consumerism and what people are predicting now, even children are screaming at the United Nations, like our young Greta Thunberg, September 19th, 2019. I want no more of your monetary fantasies and dreams. You're killing the future of our lives. My generation has no future because of your denial, because of your preoccupation with money, your preponderance and desires of economic safety. We must cease this denial, this blindness. And to me, looking at the world of extinction, I don't fear extinction. I fear the suffering that life will undergo. But looking from the psychological filter and the psychedelic filter, it's one thing to have creative thought to write another book, but, you know, for God's sake, there's no planet, there's no Amazon, there's no electricity. And so today, the demand for visionary spirit and mystical adventure and the psychic intuitive isn't just some personal splendor camp. It's really looking for solutions. And I think anyone who's exploring the psychedelic today, it's one thing to deal with stress and psychotherapeutic values of the psychedelic, but I'm really personally inviting a whole new generation, a whole new aptitude of psychonauts who explore solutions to the complexity of life as we know it and as we behave, so that we have a collective psychotherapeutic healing moment that challenges the addiction to ignorance, not to consumerism alone, to self-denigrating behaviors that are happening moment to moment. And that's, again, the beauty of intersecting the psychedelic with mindful intelligence, because when one sensitizes there, and psychedelics will radically sensitize you, but how do you evoke or ignite conscience on the psychedelic, where there's a contraction from thought, speech, and behaviors and memories and impressions where one violated the code of one's ethics? And you feel that type of correction from within. I've talked to people recently who've had prominent teachers who did extensive group use of ayahuasca here on this island with remarkably intelligent people, many of them with PhDs, and he himself felt that he had no insight, no work to do repeatedly through these intensive, high dose of ayahuasca sessions, whereas most of his students were preoccupied with stress and anxiety and trauma and healing. And yet it turned out, many of you know in the world who this gentleman is. I don't want to shame him any more than he's already been seen. It turned out to be a radical sociopath living behind the cloak of self-deception. So I bring this up, there's no guarantee that whatever dose of psychedelic you do, you're going to improve psychologically or emotionally or spiritually or morally. Very much like how meditation is no guarantee, no matter how much you do, guarantee that you will change. It'll be confronting, but denial can rise to the occasion. I've seen it in myself, and I've seen it numerous times in others. Denial and self-deception and the ability of ignorance to refold an insight back into darkness. As if ignorance gathers strength as you accumulate behaviors that are radically spiritual and psychologically intelligent, but by and large you've eaten those too. And so herein lies with the psychedelic, unless you become your own psychotherapist, your own shaman, your own Dharma teacher, your own meditation guide, which is an art in itself. I don't know that one can do it easily. And perhaps I'll do my best to share my evidence over the years. I've been an ardent student of teachers and psychotherapists. I mean, I've loved to be in that role. They've died. But I've inhabited and internalized as much as humanly possible the skill set to the extent that I could on how to bring one's own self-guidance into the process of something so radically challenging as a medium or a heroic, I don't even want to use the word heroic, or a larger dose of the psychedelic or a larger dose of meditation in a silent, intensive retreat. A month or 2, 3, 6 months of silence intensively is a radical dose of mindful intelligence. And it requires enormous support. My point here, have an ally, a soul ally in your life that either is with you during the process or before, of course, and or after, where you can process what it is that you've discovered along the edge of that terrain. So, the role of tenderness, creative bravery. Creative bravery, now that I think of that, is the willingness to disavow from cognitive plagiarism, the insights of others. Set aside external plagiarism of phrases, words, books, titles, chapters, insights, but something so beautiful about originality, vulnerability and originality, creativity, vulnerability and originality. The Van Morrison concept of the inarticulate nature of one's own heart. That means how articulate you are and inarticulate possibly to the cultural setting of what articulation sounds like. Trust in originality. And that's one of the things that's most rewarded. Those of you who are meditators know in monasteries, that's one of the things that's most supported in a yogi, is how truthful she is to her own direct experience. Not using the language of conformity. My teacher Seda U Pandita and Mahasi Seda would often say that the worst yogis, the most challenging yogis, were the senior monks, the ones specifically who had studied the traditional literature of Buddhism and studied Abhidhamma, Buddhist psychology, so fluently that they had memorized it. They were the worst yogis because they infilled their consciousness with the language of Buddhism and really didn't have a training of what the psychedelic does, which is illuminates the thought from identity. Many people think of themselves as who they are as based on what they think. And then there are those who think of their lives based upon what they feel. Meditation disavows centrality, disavows subjectivity as a permanent, unchanging awareness entity that observes the changing phenomenology at the sense doors. Rather, awareness itself is changing. There is no one fixed self-reference called the development of my awareness. It's the maturing of a faculty of consciousness known as sati, or full spectrum, intelligent, present time awareness. The hologram of mindfulness. It's not just singularity of bare attention at the sense door, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching. It's also the simultaneity of an awareness that's aware of the observer of the phenomena, and equally the consciousness that holds the awareness of the object and the object simultaneously in this configuration of consciousness, awareness, object, and often emotionality and feeling and physicality, those 6 dimensions simultaneously, yet one by one in rapid constellated configuration, awareness, without continual referencing to me. And if one is unaware of, if you're staying with me, if one is unaware of the transparent yet discernible characteristic of self-deception and ignorance, one will translate the awareness in the object on the psychedelic to be mine, to be often unchanging, and to be a reconfirmation of an ignorant projection. This means this. Or the projection of anticipation, aha, that must mean that. That must be this, in reference to the idea of something that you've heard, smelt, read, assumed, hoped for, and you fill in the projection blank with the phenomena that has nothing to do with either the projection and or ultimately a deeper liberating insight. Liberating insight. Creative bravery supports the liberation of insight to emerge in its own novel way. And so it was interesting to listen to meditation guides in Burma, and I was blessed to be able to sit with them at times and listen to the yogi talk about her and his experience within consciousness. It's like listening to someone who's on an MDMA session, a psilocybin, MEO, DMT, LSD, whatever it may be. And you get up from a reclining posture and you talk to your psychonautic, psychologically sensitive goddess guide about your process. And you can overhear that. And there is a deep willingness, an elegance of vulnerability to speak about it from a non-fixed position of this is me, this is wrong, this is truth. Yes, have ahas, have wonderments, but be gifted with the creative bravery to relax. This is relax attachment. Even just an individual who does a high dose of something, and to anoint that period of time with the relaxation of grasping. Whatever the insight may be that arises, release that too. Trust that in release there's a deeper intuitive understanding than the grasping or the holding to the insight itself as an intuitive thought. And I know it sounds somewhat counterintuitive, but open-mindedness can't be emphasized enough. Yes, we all want solutions, we all want answers, but sometimes the best solutions and the best answers are in the absence or the relaxation of the rigor of following the thought stream, emotional stream, the psychological outcome stream, and just, a snowflake in consciousness, a formation of thought and emotion and impression, the relaxation, the dissolving of that constellation, and back into occupying present time phenomena with awareness, the awareness hologram. And I use the word hologram here to support non-centrality of presence. Many people, many yogis, many people as habit, and it's a weird configuration of God and existentialism that identity seems to be coming out through the body and the mind and the senses. But a meditator and a psychonaut understands that although it looks as if it's coming out, when interiority becomes so vast as to use the word infinite, and awareness is arising and passing away simultaneous to the object, and even what you thought of as who you are can't be retained, outside and inside are seen as inseparable dimensions of the same infinity. And you go, oh my God, who I am isn't who I really am. And what I assume myself to be now that I've dissolved who I thought I was that really isn't that person, I don't have to reconfigure a newer, more psychologically wise identity. I can drop identification altogether and live in the transparency of a centerless, non-attached transparency that sees and hears and is aware, but does not keep creative bravery, intelligent love, and the courage, I want to use this, the courage to love outside of the box. The courage to love outside of the context of appropriateness to culture. Friendships that have romantic radiance. Romances that are sacredly celibate. Nuns and monks know that. We had dharmic-inspired erotic romances in monasteries, but there wasn't even a hint of attraction or hope to physically experience the organic intimacies of body and tongue and fluids. And no, it was so nuanced on a sapio transsexual beauty, if you will, that it invigorated new dimensions of what's possible with consciousness upon consciousness. Those of you who are in circles or pods or sanghas exploring the psychedelic, there's so much beauty to be in sacred company with an ally, a sister, a brother, without the need to so-called penetrate, to consummate, to decorate. Beautiful as those things are, but there are those places and times and people where and I know I'm stating things that sound probably so familiar to you, but if that's true, go with me. But that creative bravery and that intelligent love and the willingness to explore forms of love, expressions of love outside of the box. I loved my grandmother, for example, well into my 20s in such a way that felt like the most romantic, beautiful, and she was 55 years older than I was, died at nearly 100. But there was something so mystical. And I wish we had greater courage, each of us, to both explore and express the intimacies of the psychic and the intuitive and the spiritual and the existential. Not just existential cuddle puddles, but consciousness-oriented, wisdom-infused luminosity oceans, where enlightenment play is the theater of the hour. And then we go into chapter 2, where satire becomes the operative, psychic, intuitive, psychedelically inspired humor dance together on the stage of our living room. And then all of a sudden, each of us play in some kind of rhythmic, comedic dance of shared prose and poetry, a kind of collective spoken word performance, anti-performance. Ways to really, as we do yoga and we do all these asanas according to the right alignment, these psychic asanas that release contraction, that release conformity, that release judgment. It's not just doing yoga or meditation or catharting on a high dose of ayahuasca, no offense, to heal your trauma, or doing breath work, But there's so many innovative ways to play, either alone. I've been doing it in my own retreat here, in this sacred, monastic-like environment brought to me and gifted to me by the gentleman who owned this sacred land temporarily on planet Earth. What a delight it is to explore these formations. And what I'm suggesting here, in loving out of the box, in loving out of normal context, expanding the use of the psychedelic to really explore ways to expand the meaning of meditation rather than just closed eye in somewhat of a lotus position, which has its power, obviously. But how do we create formations together here that release fear in the living room? How do we expand trust here around dinner? How do we, if we knew the psychedelic meditative art wisdom formation of reconciliation, think of right now, if through our imagination, through the psychedelic and meditation and the Michio Kakuin and the bodhisattvic empathy, compassion, creation of sacred environments, if we imagined how to create the music of reconciliation, who can paint it, who can intone it, who can write it down musically, what does it sound like as an auditory frequency? And, just jumping around here, I'll probably continue this talk tomorrow as the final installment in this masterclass on psychedelics and creativity. Is, in classical Buddhism, for example, well, how should I say? Meditation, the psychedelic, yoga, are all to do, lowercase all, with learning to be more literate in the language of life. That's what I wanted to say. And that word, language and life, and becoming more literate, the merging of perception and wisdom and impressions with memory and the senses and physicality and the substratum, the ocean and the sky, the totality and dimensionality, that simultaneity, that engagement, if you will, is so everything, and call it the language of life. And then you could expand on that language, and I'll close here with the language of freedom. And I think that could be set as an intention to discover in one's own probably higher dose experimentation. May I feel into my unique understanding and evolve creatively, compassionately, with tenderness to self and other. My literacy in the evolutional development of the language of freedom. Freedom from freeing the stream from fear. Freeing, that becomes existential activism, doesn't it? We become the Buddha mind there, the visionary spirit, the bodhisattvic spirit, freeing the cognitive dimensions and the atmospheres of interiority from the invisible configuration currents of fear, and commingling with fear with courage and bravery and tenderness and psychic intuitive, and seeing the emptiness of that fear, looking into the mirror, I see you, fear, on the face of the pond looking back at me. But as I sensitize more to the intuitive perception beyond the surface face of consciousness, I see into the water and I see the emergence of a lotus. If we're careful, we can see into the transparent oceans of consciousness. If we're neglectful, we see the reflection of ourselves looking back at ourselves in the mirror of me looking at me, rather than seeing that mindfulness sees beyond the mirror and sees beyond me, and it feels holographically into the ocean of shared time and space. And my point here is this language of life, becoming more cognitively, sonically fluent in the vibrancies and the acoustic nature, the existential acoustic nature of the language of freedom. To me, when I look at the life of the Buddha and the Bodhisattva, an individual who really became woke in the woke sense for me, of unordinary disobedience to McWokeness in America today and around the world, of wow, freedom rocks. Freedom is the colossal quest of consciousness to inhabit the sacred. The true meaning of the psychedelic, to inhabit the sacred on the terms of what releases centrality, the gravitational forces of fear and greed, and illuminates both wisdom and freedom. What is freedom? I know during the war in Yugoslavia, when I would go out to these underground nightclubs in Zagreb, in the capital of Croatia, we would be doing all kinds of psychedelics that were being brought down to us and gifted from Amsterdam and given to us on these tables at night. And as a general rule, because dictatorship and genocide wants to denigrate existence and to create forms that annihilate uniqueness, to make individuals into the same dull sameness as a dictator. It's the absence of novelty, the absence of freedom, the absence of creativity, the absence of unity and diversity. That's dictatorship. And we've got to be very careful, to state the obvious, of not understanding totalitarian currents within one's own substratum. And my point here is no two of us would dance in the same way. The language of freedom is that no two will dance and think and feel and inhabit liberty in the same way. However, it comes with a responsibility clause. How do I impact others? The narcissist doesn't care about her or his impact on other. It's a radically insecure, malevolent expression of diabolical need to control at all costs through deception and harm and the absence of conscience that illuminates caring, mutuality, unity, and harmony. And so freedom with a clause, a responsibility, a heartfelt, deeper responsibility that my insights are insightful. Yes, take care of your own inner work as much as possible, but simultaneously take care of the heart space, the word and physical space as well of other beings in the process of developing one's own freedom. So freedom with the clause of responsibility to care for the freedom of others and to study the textural impact of consciousness upon the environment, on our family, our friends, our own bodies, and I would call both life and the future of life. The last point, this language of life, this language of freedom, and I want to end with a true psychedelic experience, a very obscure discourse attributed to the Buddha called the Tuvataka Sutta. And I've been so down with this the last couple of years to the point of irritation to some and excitement to others. But what's fascinating about it, it reveals on page attributed to the Buddha such an expression of the optimal power of the psychedelic as an intrinsic, organic evolution of wisdom inside the mind. I want to move from the psychedelic as a molecule to the psychedelic as a dimensionality within the naturalness of all consciousnesses, called the Panya molecule. Panya to me is synonymous with the psychedelic within one's own mind because it has the function to manifest consciousness realistically. Wisdom. You see reality rightly. And that said, the Buddha is the pinnacle of wisdom in human terms, in context to the Michio Kakuin multidimensionality of quantum physics, who had the highest capacity known, it said, of the evolutional development of the psychic intuitive. Duplicating bodies, seeing nearly countless lifetimes in the past, seeing the future in countless incarnations, understanding personality types in a spectrum of so much diversity, having a skillfulness of thought at cellular level to understand fertility, personality types, and drop liberation language, frequency vibrations into shared space and to create liberating formations for other to free themselves if they have the aptitude from fear, greed, delusion. And these sonnets of liberation, these existential prayers and hymns of release, they're all about the release of ignorance and the radiance of freedom. Mind-blowing. The Buddha was said in this dimension, in the sutta, to have created a duplicate body, have the capacity to create within the psyche of the duplication configurations like songs on an album of transformation, a dialogue with himself, because he felt that the audience of angels and deities and Brahmas and Devas and others were more likely to hear, based on the personality attempt, the personality dimensions he assessed, to hear a dialogue than himself talking. I think there's something so powerful about the dialectic, the existential dialectic. And it's said in the sutta, it's a dialogue with the Buddha, with a self-created entity. I think it's the only one in 11,000 pages attributed to the teachings of the Buddha in the classical Tipitaka. And it's said during this particular discourse that those beings present, listening and feeling, embodied in different ways, in different capacities, the language of freedom, the language of life. And the result was a type of interactive, sonic, dharmically artistic, created liberation. And so I bring this up to end today. Immediacy, open-mindedness, a visionary spirit embodying the bodhisattvic spirit in each of us. A play in one's own humble, modest, intimate, courageous attempt to access information and voices called the psychic, the more intuitive dimensions of reality. Letting go of thought, relax attachment, relax centrality. Creative bravery, the role of tenderness, intelligent love, a love that's dedicated to your happiness, not my needs being met alone. A rejoicing in your style, on your terms, a willingness to be responsible, to understand our impact on self and other and the environment and the future of life, to study those psychological, emotional dimensions of being called impact. How do you perceive me? Developing formations of reconciliation, something deeper than forgiveness, harmony, hymns, unity songs, a freedom poem on the altar of totality, whatever it is in you that wants to come out, skillfully learning to courageously love outside of the box, a willingness to explore disobedience to cultural, spiritual norms, even among the so-called spiritual elite, how to maintain autonomy and disobedience even to authority and to gurus and to teachers, to maintain autonomy and independent thinking, even to understand the beauty of dialogue and debate. And to conclude again, the language of life. Creativity, the psychedelic and meditation, or how well do we really empower the day, the session, the dose with may this increase my literacy of freedom, so that in my own passing forward in this great expanse called rebirthing, conventionally called dying and death, but rebirthing, that the psychic residual of my presence, my own life formations, whether it be a day, a year, 10, 50, 90, 100, we're all destined to transition, that our psychic contribution to the topography of this world that we're in, this dimension, this earth, cultivates and supports the more organic flourishing of freedom and the bravery for all of us to transcend our religions and to learn this collective language of life and liberty and empathy and compassion and ultimately a wonderment at the unknown, the mystery, no matter what. It seems that infinity means there'll always be more room to integrate that vast expanse. So may we all find together and individually in our dosing, in our psychedelic exploration, our meditative explorations, our human explorations, a more sacred environment where the dance party can have total freedom from fear, freedom from ignorance, freedom from violence. And I do believe that Nibbana, the Buddhist concept of an unconditional safety, security, the absence of ignorance, the absence of fear, the absence of greed, the absence of violence, the absence of denigration, the high expression of unity and harmony and peace and novelty. We can each play our role in creating Tubataka dynamics, where the dance party can exceed even our wildest imagination. So from my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in. Tomorrow is my final day for a little bit. I hope to return sometime in November, early November. And so from my heart to yours, have a beautiful day. And tomorrow will be the final part in this series on creative intelligence and mindful intelligence, and each of us inhabiting more literally the language of life and liberty. Thank you.